Welcome to all of you fire drill firefighters. Thank you for joining us. And to those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Fridays family, where we learn about the climate crisis and what we can do about it. Each of you can help our movement grow by sharing today's show so your friends and colleagues can join the movement. We're trying to build up numbers and community, because that's what it's going to take. So if you would just take a moment now and hit the share button, the more people who understand the potential climate catastrophe and are willing to act, the more chance we have to succeed, right? And we have to succeed. Before I go any further, let's have some good news. I'm so excited about this good news today. Okay, listen. The Biden administration wants to steer $30 billion in farm aid money from the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation to pay farmers to implement sustainable practices and support carbon capture in their soil. The administration's push to encourage carbon capture on farms could bolster an emerging market of on-farm emissions reduction and the technological advances that are helping growers improve soil health. See, before the fossil fuel industry and the industrial farm people got their tentacles on our food systems, soil was healthy, and it's what sequesters carbon emissions from the atmosphere. So this is such good news. It makes me so happy. And by the way, listen to this. The response to my asking if you were interested in having a once-a-month movie night, followed by a discussion and drinks made from a recipe. We'll choose one that you all send us, Fire Drill Friday Quarantini recipe. Anyway, the response was so enthusiastic that we're going to do it, and we're going to announce the first date next week, so don't forget to tune in. And today, we're going to talk about Congress and the Thrive Agenda. After COVID relief, perhaps the most important piece of legislation pending in Congress will be related to what will we need to make happen in order to recover from the economic devastation that the COVID pandemic has created, and how that can simultaneously mitigate against the climate crisis. What are the goals of this recovery? How will we ensure these benefits are equally distributed? And more important, how can we use this moment to change course and chart a new, more just and sustainable normal? You know, we can't go back to the old normal. We need a new normal. The old normal was the problem, right? Anyway, I have an answer for you for all these questions, and it's called the Thrive Agenda. This legislation is what we have to fight for now. Thrive is an acronym for transform, heal, and renew by investing in a vibrant economy. It's a roadmap to a just recovery from the COVID pandemic, a congressional resolution with a plan to put millions of people back to work, building an economy that simultaneously prioritizes climate, racial and economic justice, and democracy. You may remember that we talked about the Thrive Agenda in November, but since then, so much has happened. You know, the Democrats now have control of both the House and the Senate, and we have some insights into Biden's priorities. We've seen that when pushed, he is willing to listen and go big on climate. In January was the launch of a Green New Deal network, and this was described as a coalition of grassroots organizations, labor and climate and environmental justice organizations, growing a movement to pass local, state, and national policies that create millions of family-sustaining union jobs, ensure racial and gender equity, and take action on climate at the scale and scope the crisis demands. I mean, does that sound good or what? The fact that the coalition is called the Green New Deal Coalition, Green New Deal Network, that's what's pushing the Thrive Agenda? Well, that should tell you something about what the Thrive Agenda is. It is, in fact, in line with the framework of the Green New Deal, but it's been tailored to meet the crises of today. You know, when it was created, we didn't have a COVID pandemic. In many ways, the broad political momentum behind Thrive, which is backed by everyone from Chuck Schumer to Ilhan Omar, who is, by the way, going to be our guest next week, is a victory for the Green New Deal movement. It's so good. Democratic Party leaders may have believed that climate change is a coastal blue state issue and that racial and economic justice are only concerns of urban voters. But polling has showed that there's really, really broad support all across the country for progressive and intersectional stimulus agenda that focuses on jobs, climate, and justice. And unlike the Green New Deal, Thrive has a solid early list of unions who've endorsed it. Among them, the Service Employees International Union, the Communication Workers of America, the Association of Flight Attendants, the American Federation of Teachers, the American Postal Workers Union, and many others. And by the way, not that I want to brag on Fire Drill Fridays, but a lot of those union leaders have been guests on Fire Drill Fridays. The next 6 months will define the Biden presidency and define the coming decade for us as a country. If the Thrive agenda becomes a reality, just about every aspect of our lives will shift for the good. We're talking about big, bold steps taken by the federal government, like what happened in the 30s under Roosevelt. And you gotta understand what kind of an opposition that's going to mount. I mean, you know, the tragedy that's happening right now in Texas, a lot of that has to, besides, you know, being directly because of the climate crises, but it also has to do with the fact that the very conservative leadership in Texas for a long time hates activist government, hates a strong, robust federal government. You know, it's like, we can do it ourselves. You know, all of their energy, by the way, comes from inside Texas. They don't get any energy from outside. They don't want any help from outside. And look what's happened, right? A strong federal government that can help us is what's needed. Okay, so what exactly is the Thrive Agenda? It's a new congressional resolution with 8 pillars for economic renewal. The pillars include federal investments to create millions of family-sustaining jobs, upgrading our nation's water, energy, and transportation infrastructure, and retrofitting buildings to cut costs and pollution, and supporting child and elderly care, and restoring wetlands and forests, investing in family farms, manufacturing clean energy technologies. This is where all the jobs would be, right? Also, giving all workers access to unions and penalizing employers that try to stop union organizing. Love that. It also calls for federal investments in communities of color and low-income communities that have been disproportionately affected by unfair policies. I love this now. The United States will fully recognize the sovereignty and right to self-governance of Native American nations and making policy changes to honor environmental and social responsibilities to them. Thrive also calls for federal investments to replace lead pipes, limit air and water pollution, ensure equal access to public health resources, and address the health and environmental impacts of toxic pollution, particularly in low-income communities. It also calls for federal investments to address climate change by eliminating carbon pollution from our electricity grid by 2035, and there's more. But the resolution clearly focuses on federally supported good jobs that address both the economic, democracy, and climate crises. I'm just so excited that we have the guests that we have today. They are so well equipped to answer any questions that we have about Thrive. Anthony Rogers-Wright is the first one I'm going to introduce. He was selected as one of the GRIST, Rogers-Wright.org. 50 people you'll be talking about in 2016. Anthony Rogers-Wright has over a decade of policy analysis, community organizing, and advocacy experience. In 2016, he acted as a surrogate and policy advisor for the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign, also served as a policy advisor for Sanders, Governor Jay Inslee, and Senator Elizabeth Warren during the 2020 presidential election season. He currently serves as the Director of Environmental Justice for New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. He's a proud and active member of the New York Renews Coalition and sits on the board of directors for Friends of the Earth, Backbone Campaign, and Center for Sustainable Economy, as well as the advisory board for Evergreen Action. Our next speaker is Rhiana Gun Wright. She is the director of climate policy at the Roosevelt Institute. Before joining Roosevelt, Gun Wright was the policy director for New Consensus, where she helped develop and promote the Green New Deal. She was supposed to be a guest on this show when we were in DC in October. Our second Fire Drill Friday teach-in was about the Green New Deal, and she was going to be our guest, and she got sick. So I'm so thrilled that finally, the woman that was the co-creator of the Green New Deal is going to be with us. A 2013 Rhodes Scholar, she previously worked as the policy director for Abdul El-Sayed's 2018 Michigan gubernatorial campaign and stood on the policy team for former First Lady Michelle Obama. She graduated magna cum laude from Yale in 2011 with majors in African American studies and women, gender, and sexuality studies. Welcome to you both. And thank you so, so much for taking time to join Fire Drill Fridays.
So good to be here, Sister Jane. Thank you so much.
Good to see you again, Anthony. Rhiana, I want to start with you because you were the co-creator of the Green New Deal. Please explain, please explain what's different between that and Thrive. I mean, was it a politically strategic decision to rename it or what?
So yes and no. So the difference is the Green New Deal is a plan for a 10-year economic mobilization, still around the nexus of jobs, justice, and climate, but it's really an overarching governing agenda. It's about the entire government coming forward and mobilizing the economy to create millions of jobs in a transition away from fossil fuels. The Thrive agenda is about economic recovery. So the best way to think about it is the GND in terms of economic recovery. So in a lot of ways, it's sort of the first step to a Green New Deal. And that is really important. And the reason why I think Thrive focuses on economic recovery is that the backbone of economic mobilization is investment. And recovery packages are huge investments. And they're some of the biggest investments governments make. And so it's very important in a recovery package that you are doing things that lead to a Green New Deal, because there's no guarantee that this level of investment will happen again. And often, once it does happen, governments are slow to do it again. So if we do it and like the CARES Act, it just bails out the fossil fuel companies, we're going to be in a bad position.
Yeah. It's so great because you know better than anyone, we can't address the climate crisis sequentially. You know, now we're going to deal with the economic crisis caused by COVID. Then we'll deal with justice. Then we'll deal with climate. No, they're all interconnected anyway, so they all have to be solved together. Now, Rhiana, you grew up in a frontline community close to a source of high levels of air pollution, and you developed asthma. And you wrote an essay in the wonderful book, All We Can Save. You said you could barely run until your late teens, and that you missed school every spring, and that your lungs are weak to this day because of it. Is this part of what inspired you to develop the Green New Deal?
It is partially. It's interesting because I actually started working on the Green New Deal because I needed a job after a political campaign. And I was really interested in the systems level approach, but I wasn't an environmental or climate activist before. I worked on questions about social justice and poverty. But what has kept me around is in part is I found out that that I did grow up in a frontline community. Asthma was so common where I grew up that we actually talked about it like a childhood disease. And so the story of my family was that I just grew out of it as I got older. And it wasn't until I was working on the Green New Deal when I thought about like, hey, it's actually not normal that most of the kids on your block have asthma. Like it wasn't normal for you to be out of school every spring for years on end. And so that actually made me really upset to think about my mom, who had worked so hard to get me in good schools, knowing that I was like unwillingly poisoned along with a lot of my neighbors. And
Yeah.
my mom didn't sign off on that. She didn't know. So that level of coercion really upsets me. And the fact that we have built a system that allows that. And it's one of the reasons the fossil fuel industry continues, right? People like me get sick and people with power and money don't, right? And so they think we have forever to solve this. Whereas folks like me don't. And it's really funny because, well, I guess not funny, but one of the reasons I miss Fire Drill Fridays was because I had pneumonia, which is not in small part because I had asthma growing up.
Right. Interesting. I love that you say you started working on the Green New Deal because you needed a job. Well, that's good reason. Very honest. But listen, Rhiana, in the book, you also say, and I love this, this is a quote from Rhiana: policy is nothing if not a system for creating and distributing power. I think this is really good for all of us to keep in mind when we read about new policies, right? I mean, we have to ask ourselves, well, who is benefiting from this? Who's getting power from this? And we know from the past economic mobilizations that address crises like the like the original New Deal in the 30s because of the Great Depression, or our mobilizations for World War II, the mobilizations following the 2008 recession. All of those mobilizations exacerbated power imbalances, right? So who does the Thrive policy give power to?
So the Thrive policy gives power to, I think of it in sort of three buckets. It gives power to the public sector and the federal government by saying, you all need to take the lead. No one else is coming. You all have the tools to actually push this in the right direction. Then I think it also centers frontline and indigenous communities. So those are folks who will gain from the Thrive agenda in particular, and also workers. There's a lot in Thrive about labor rights, about the rights to unions, and that is partially, again, about power. We are living in a time where we know what happens when workers have no power, when they're prevented from unionizing. And there is a version of dealing with climate change where you don't talk about power, right? And you have green jobs where no one is unionized and that aren't paying a living wage, where you still have people in the care sector that aren't making enough. And so the Thrive agenda, I think in particular, helps those communities. But I think in general, with the Thrive agenda and the Green New Deal, it's, I think, important to think both about who it's giving power to, but also how, right? A lot of what inequity happens by how policies are implemented. Where do the grants go? Who can apply? Who gets the contracts? And so the Thrive agenda is also about thinking about, how do we distribute power? Like, what are the mechanisms? What ways are people getting chances to own energy assets? What ways are people getting paid to sell energy back to the grid, right? How are people of color going to actually have their incomes increase versus being shut out from key programs? And so all of that, I think, is part of the Thrive agenda, because when you live in a place like the US where power is so unequal, unless you are purposely trying to break that and change power relationships, you can just end up recreating them.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that this the approach of the Thrive agenda is going to show all those people who used to have factory jobs that are so angry and desperate now, when they go and vote for tyrants like who, that they're going to see that the Biden administration does see them, does hear their pain, and is going to do something about it. That's how you, I think, win those people over. Anthony, Senators Ed Markey, Bernie Sanders, and Cory Booker, and Senate Leader Schumer, and 7 other senators submitted Thrive to the Senate, right? Well, where does it stand right now? And will it be brought as a package to a vote on the Senate floor, or is President Biden going to pass it through budget resolution the way he did recently with the large COVID relief package?
Thank you so much for that question, Jane. So, right now, the National Green New Deal Network, who I have the pleasure of working with Sister Rihanna, is in the process of actually answering, this question is what type of legislative package would be best to get Thrive enacted. So, there are a lot of avenues. We are, of course, in a budget reconciliation season, as you just named, in which, what we're trying to do is make sure that an obstructive Republican minority doesn't prevent the passage of groundbreaking legislation, whether it's minimum wage or Thrive, increasing, reuniting children at the border with their parents, immigration reform. The Green New Deal Network is in the process of developing that legislation so that it can absolutely move. What I will also say, to your point, is that we know it can't just stop with budget reconciliation, which is why the Green New Deal Network, along with a lot of their allies, submitted a letter to Majority Leader Schumer, also compounding the fact that we have to abolish this filibuster, which is, as former President Obama said, is a Jim Crow relic that was utilized to suppress. Sister Rihanna was just talking about power. Right now, what we're talking about, again, speaking of Jim Crow relics, is going after people's voting power, the power for people to be able to vote. And so that we know that we have to also abolish this filibuster to get all kinds of social programs, including this idea of free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous and tribal nations right here in modern day United States of America. So the Green New Deal Network is working very diligently, I assure you, at developing that package such that it is germane in this season of budget reconciliation, but also being utilized as an organizing tool that will get, maybe some more recalcitrant senators like Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema to see the light of day, and that, in order to survive, we have to thrive. And in order to thrive, we are going to have to get rid of some parliamentary tactics that have suppressed too many people for far too long.
Yeah. And I will also add to Anthony's, I think it also points out the intersections, like you said. None of these things happen sequentially. And this is also points out the intersection between the need for democracy reform and climate, right? There's a number of other things around climate, a clean energy standard where you say, this much energy has to come from renewable sources, or we want to invest 40% of federal investments in climate and frontline communities. Those are things that can't happen without filibuster reform. And those are things that also are very connected to efforts to suppress votes. When people of color get to vote equally, I think we would see a different fight around climate.
Yeah, for sure. Now, am I correct that administrations can do one budget resolution bill a year?
Well, they can sometimes actually do two, but it would be for the next fiscal year. So the budget reconciliation process is typically only used once during. So we're in the 117th Congress right now during that Congress's tenure, but it can be used twice to also account, for the next year, and that's something that may have to happen given, as you were talking about earlier, Jane, the interlinked crises, that we're facing right now. You mentioned what's going on in Texas. That is clearly, as Rhiana also pointed out, a failure of power, a failure of infrastructure that has been decaying for decades. And so that process will likely have to be used for budget reconciliation. But I would say that the easiest way around all of this is definitely to abolish the filibuster. I want to lift up the incredible work that Senator Bernie Sanders, chairman of the finance of the budget committee of the Senate right now, he's getting very, very creative because he, like all of us, your listeners, all of us in this climate community understand that these problems are absolutely interlinked and they're going to require an intersectional approach to solve these challenges. And that's what Senator Sanders is trying to do right now. But I would also point to Thrive co-sponsors like Senator Markey, who said, when he introduced his landmark environmental justice mapping bill, along with the incredible sister Cori Bush from Missouri, that probably this year we're going to have to abolish the filibuster and that it's only a matter of time.
Rhiana, you've written that while some parts of the Green New Deal may look like policies that aren't related to climate, that in fact, all parts of it contribute to decarbonization, even the more social policies like universal health care and education and training. Please explain it to us and help us understand why this is true.
Totally. I love talking about this. So essentially, there's a few ways to think about climate change. The way that I think had been happening for a really long time is just thinking about emissions, right? Climate change is this the result of burning fossil fuels. We just have to get emissions down, which is true. But emissions are driven by economic activity, and a lot of emissions are baked into the structure of our economy, down to like how you make cement, how you make steel, all those sorts of things. And when you are trying to take an economy off of fossil fuel, I compare it to if all humans had to stop eating food. Because if you think about it, fossil fuels are the energy that powers our society. Food's the energy that powers our bodies. Both of those things are systems. And so if someone said tomorrow, okay, people that can't eat food, you have to eat red algae, what would happen? What would grocery stores look like? What would restaurants look like? Would everyone near red algae become a millionaire? Who knows? Anything could happen. And it's similar with moving us off of fossil fuels. That will mean that our economy has to change. And that has effects that aren't just about putting solar panels on houses or increasing the number of wind turbines. That could mean that industries are changing, right? The way we build cars will change, right? The way that we build heat pumps will change. All of that will change. And to allow that to happen without hurting people unnecessarily, that's why you need the social elements of it. So think about if people are going to lose jobs, perhaps, or because of fossil fuel, we have to stop using fossil fuels. How much easier would that transition be if people had access to healthcare? If their insurance isn't tied to their employer, if they can move to get a new job, right? How do women take part in this transition if there's no childcare, right? We already saw hundreds of thousands of women lose their jobs because of this recession. How do they come back, right? We don't have the care infrastructure that we need. How do people in frontline communities get access to jobs, right? Weatherizing homes, putting up solar panels, manufacturing new things, if there's no new training programs, right? If there's no way for them to enter that. And so that's why we say it all contributes to decarbonization, because you can't just pluck people out and put them somewhere else. People need structures, they need support to move. And the economy in our country, we need new supports in order to make a lot of changes without it falling on the people that have the fewest resources, which we see now, right? Yeah. When coal companies go bankrupt, their workers are taking the hit, not their CEOs, right? And so that is why all of it matters, because you can't shift a society if you aren't also shifting the social safety net.
Yeah, that's so great. It's so important for all of us to understand this, because there's going to be such opposition to all of the aspects of Thrive. It's going to be called, like the Green New Deal was called, a way to force through left-wing priorities under the guise of the climate crisis, a left-wing wish list. It's important that all of us know how to argue in favor of Thrive, and why, when you're addressing climate and the need to put millions of people to work, you have to then have the backup support structure in place. So thank you for that. Anthony, I've read that Thrive would create 16 million new jobs. Wow. Explain why in the current system, some won't be able to access the new job market that Thrive is committed to. Well, in a way, this is already, Rhiana already answered this, but why do we need to expand other sectors like childcare? Why is it so important that healthcare not be tied to somebody's employer?
No, absolutely. So, and Rhiana did touch on this. So I do want to lift up my good friends, Isabel Esteves and Ben Beachy, who work with the Sierra Club, who are members of the Green New Deal Network. Right. And Ben and Isabel are two of the most meticulous people that you're going to meet. And they partnered with the Political Economy Research Institute at UMass Amherst to break this all down. And now they're actually going back and doing that report over to break it down by race, gender, and ethnicity, because they're extremely meticulous. And they broke it down by how many jobs by sector would be created for every $1 million, that is spent. Now, the quantity of jobs is very, very important. We understand that. Sister Rhiana touched also on the quality of these jobs and reshaping, how we think about a low carbon job market to begin with. Millions of women, who have been kept out of this economy prior to COVID, right? All COVID did was just exacerbate everything that we knew that what was going on: misogyny, sexism, racism, social inequalities, etc. So the quality of these jobs are extremely important, which is why it's great to have partners. American Federation of Teachers, who I was on with the great Randy Whitegarten on your show last time, our good friends from SEIU, and even people, like Sarah Nelson, understand that, to have a just and equitable transition from people who have lost their jobs. Like Rhiana said, as we transition from fossil fuels, like Rhiana said, we have to make sure that they have health care. That's just guaranteed. Their pensions are absolutely honored. Their salaries are absolutely honored. And the all the entitlements, right, that they have earned are going to go over with them as they transition. Now, we also have to make sure that these are good paying jobs. I joke around all the time that we're not going to ask a pipe fitter who's making $90,000 or $100,000 to take a $40,000 pay cut to install solar retrofit buildings. I joke around all the time that if the average organizer took a $40,000 pay cut, their salary would be negative $20,000. And that is not a just transition. That might be just a transition, but we're talking about a just transition for what we want to do with Thrive. As Rhiana also spoke about, when we're talking about transforming, the types of jobs, care jobs, which are low carbon jobs, by the way, we also do have to talk about restructuring the entire economy, which is why we say that restarting the economy doesn't go nearly far enough. We have to reshape it, altogether, so that we are including equal pay for equal work, and also making sure that we are not forcing people to choose between the public health of themselves and their communities and putting food on the table, which is why, also things like forgiving student loan debt is a huge factor. And that's also part of what we're thinking about, with Thrive. We can't have young people leaving university, and being more in debt than the cost of a home. That is not a care economy. That is not an economy that allows people to get into a workforce that is equitable and available to all people. So Thrive really looks at labor standards. We're lucky to be working with our labor partners, other organizations like the Labor Network for sustainability who also understand that without the workers, we're not going anywhere. You know, Sister Jane, that there is a direct correlation between the decrease in worker quality, the decrease in worker pay that went along with the decrease in unionization. Thrive understands that the more power labor has, the more power the grassroots have, and the more power that we have to get to the regenerative economies we want to get to.
Trumpka, the head of the AFL-CIO, has started to say, and I think it's important to keep in mind, that it's not just we have to find good union jobs for the laid off fossil fuel workers. There can't be a space of time between working in fossil fuel and going to some other job where they don't have jobs. You know, there's got to be a tying together. It has to be happening at the same time. The training and the preparing for new jobs has to happen while they still have their old jobs, so they don't fall through the cracks in between. Let me ask you something else, Anthony. Thrive aims to address climate change by eliminating carbon pollution from our electricity grid by 2035. But what percentage of our carbon emissions comes from the electricity sector? And I'm asking this because the climate scientists have been very clear. Carbon emissions must be cut in half, they say, by 2030. So why does Thrive say 2035? And will the cutting of the electricity sector carbon use comprise 50% of the emissions?
Well, so, you know, to answer that, the electricity sector, the way we create our power, according to the United States Energy Information Administration, accounts for about 31% of the nation's aggregate emissions. And that's carbon dioxide, methane, you know, hydrofluorocarbons, et cetera. We have to vastly and quickly, you know, cut that out by switching to renewable energy. The technology is there, the battery storage is coming, and we saw in Texas what happens when you have an antiquated, for-profit, fossil fuel based energy system. It just absolutely doesn't work. And wind turbines don't freeze, by the way, and that's for Governor Abbott. The other thing, but Thrive also goes after other sectors. You started off the show with the great news about President Biden regarding the agricultural sector. I'm here in Nebraska, as you know, where I've been working with my good friend Graham Christensen, who's a sixth-generation farmer who started a regenerative agriculture revolution here in Nebraska and throughout the Midwest. Agriculture is 15% of our nation's emissions, so we have to cut that down as well. And then, of course, you know, the one of the big kahunas is, of course, transportation, which Thrive also addresses as well. So the combination of a rapid phase out from all of these sectors, right? Again, this is an intersectional approach. And as you were saying earlier, we can't prioritize, oh, we'll go after transportation, then we'll go after ag, then we'll go after power generation. So this is one sector of Thrive that is saying that by 2035, I mean, ideally, I'm with you, sister, by 2030 would be ideal, but no later than 2035, our electricity sector cannot be dependent on fossil fuels, or we're going to find ourselves in real trouble.
Thanks for that, Anthony. Tell our audience what the status of Thrive is at the present moment. What are the chances that it's going to pass without much change, do you think? How much is it going to have to be divided up? For example, what I announced earlier as good news, that Biden is going to give billions of dollars to the agricultural sector to become regenerative agriculture. Is that part of the Thrive agenda that was done separately? I'm not clear about this. So
sure. So one, I mean, you know, if policy is about distributing power, as Sister Rihanna said, good policy cannot be divorced from organizing. It's just absolutely impossible. Now, the Green New Deal Network recently submitted a letter to President Biden with basically expectations and demands to adhere to the Thrive Agenda. That letter was signed by over 200 organizations, a broad coalition of faith groups, labor, friends in the environmental sector, from environmental justice groups to League of Conservation Voters, Center for American Progress. So the message is a broad one, and one that people can get behind. But what we also know is that it's what people do on the ground. It's what the organizers do to shift the narrative and get, and leverage their power to, or use their power to leverage their members of Congress and their senators. And that's why the Green New Deal Network, during the upcoming spring recess, which we believe will be around the end of March, are going to go through a gargantuan effort to organize on the ground during that recess. Very, very similar to what we saw when women and young people were uprising in 2016 after the election of you-know-who and ahead of the midterm elections. And we saw what happened in 2018 when that grassroots power was unleashed. We saw what just happened in Georgia when the grassroots power of Black women and Black organizers, Black rural organizers, was unleashed in Georgia. And that's the same effort that it's going to take, which is why the Green New Deal Network has a 50-state strategy, including the U.S. colony of Puerto Rico. Everyone has to get involved in this because it does affect everyone. As Rhiana said, it affects people disproportionately, Black, brown, and indigenous people. But we know that we have a government in place right now, as you said earlier, that is starting to listen. Even ahead of the Thrive Agenda being re-released as a resolution and the legislation being drafted, we saw Joe Biden commit through his Justice 40 program to 40% of investments in Black, brown, indigenous, poor, white environmental justice communities. That's a ground up process. That idea came out of New York, the New York Renew's landmark legislation, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which said that 40% of these investments have to go to these communities. So we have the geniuses like Rhiana to write us the policy. We call Rhiana the professor, the architect sometimes as well. But now that we have that vision, that architects like Rhiana have provided, we're going to go organize like hell for it. And, inspired by things like you do too, Sister Jane, I'm willing to put our bodies on the line, willing to risk arrest, because we know that this is not just a political fight. This is a moral fight. And that's so stay tuned for that in the March recess of the amazing organizing that is going to synergize with the amazing policy chops of people like Rhiana.
Thank you.
I'll also say,
yeah.
No, I was going to say, it's also circulating on the Hill to the point that Senator Schumer has actually said on Rachel Maddow that he would like the economic recovery package to look like Thrive when it comes out of the Senate Democrats. And that's encouraging.
Yeah, it sure is. Let's take some audience questions. Maddie?
Have some great questions. First off, from Candida on Zoom, and this is for both of you. I read that people are saying that the Green New Deal is to blame for the blackouts. Why are people saying that, and how do we stop this myth?
People are saying it because they're in trouble. And they're looking for somebody else to be in trouble. And it was very, very quickly, it's unclear exactly where the story came from, but very quickly after the blackouts, there was a photo of a wind turbine that wasn't even from the US that was frozen or appeared to be frozen. And there was a story that the issue was that wind turbines froze, which then people took to say renewables, and then they took it a step further to the Green New Deal. The truth is only 20% of Texas's power is from wind turbines, so it's not even possible that they would cause those blackouts, and they were actually the least responsible. It's actually frozen instruments, mostly at fossil fuel powered plants. So I think the way to stop it is just when you hear it, say, no, that doesn't make any sense. That's not true. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has spoken out about it. There's already stories coming out refuting it. So just spread the information where you can, and also recognize that a lot of people saying it are saying it on bad faith. So also don't stress out and waste your time.
Well, let's remember also there are very well functioning wind turbines in Greenland and Norway, and Denmark.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
In Wisconsin.
Right. They know how to prepare them for cold weather. It's just Texas hasn't done it. And they've had blackouts because of cold several times before, and they've been warned, Texas has, and they didn't do anything, just like anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I would just also add,
Oh,
right, I was just going to say, I would also add that, it's very dangerous. We've already seen what can happen with toxic narratives in this country with, with everything that led up to January 6th, right? It is irresponsible for the governor of Texas to be pushing such a false narrative. The United Frontline Table, their members, including Climate Justice Alliance, Indigenous Environmental Network, Global Grassroots Justice, and Right to the City Alliance, are a part of the Green New Deal network, and developed, along with a good friend of ours, Anthony Giancaterina, what we call the 5 points of intervention. And narrative was one of those points, represented by seeds. And as Rhiana said, the first thing you have to confront, false narratives. We know about the nexus between climate denialism, white supremacy, and the fossil fuel industry, and that just has to be eviscerated once and for all. Feckless notions like, if it's not that they cause the blackout, wind turbines apparently are a carcinogen, as well, all of a sudden. And these are the desperate acts of a dying industry that knows that their day of reckoning is almost here. It's almost done, and they can't stop a regenerative and renewable revolution. So you do what you have to do when you don't have the facts in front of you. You lie.
Right.
Another question, Maddie?
Yeah, from Dale on Facebook. I live in a rural area where the goal for a lot of folks was a job at the local mill. How do we ensure green and sustainable jobs come to places like my small town where we feel forgotten by most people now that the industry is gone?
That's a really great question. And a lot of not forgetting about those places is about how do you direct federal investment. And so that's one of the reasons that the 40% commitment is really exciting, because some of that money could go to rural communities depending on their relationship to the fossil fuel industry, to how close they are to pollutants, et cetera. But that's also the reason for something like a Green New Deal, where you are asking federal, state, and local governments to really proactively think about how their economies are structured and made up, and how they want to be part of a clean economy. So a lot of making sure jobs goes there is about making sure that economic development planning is going on and that money is flowing alongside and to the plans that communities have developed for how they want to be part of the clean energy transition and what they're well suited to do. So a lot of it really comes down to actually the involvement of the public sector.
Yeah, I would also say that it's extremely unfortunate and execrable, that we have overlooked our rural communities, which are areas that produce our food, areas that can absolutely produce our energy, and areas that can totally manufacture the things that we need for a renewable energy revolution. We absolutely in the Thrive agenda do lift up rural communities for that reason, as Sister Rhiana was saying, because there's absolutely so much potential, and we think that people shouldn't have to leave where they are. We're seeing young farmers and young rural people leave their communities and sometimes creating absolute ghost towns, and that just has to do with absolute greed, unfortunately, and some of the people who have pulled the puppet strings of our government for far too long, which is why this isn't a left wing or a right wing issue. This is an issue for people who reside in this country right now, and we know that we have to do better by Black, Brown, Indigenous, rural, and poor white communities all in the same breath. And this is exactly why, as Jane was saying earlier, we cannot prioritize and say, oh, we'll take care of the urban communities. Don't worry, rural communities will get to you. That's not how this is going to work moving forward. There are tremendous opportunities for green economies to be unleashed in rural communities, and the Thrive Agenda is absolutely going to make sure that happens through agricultural reforms, and then, just as Rihanna was saying, economic opportunity reforms in these areas as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. Oh, Jane, it looks like you're on mute.
So I am. I muted myself to blow my nose. We have time for one more audience question.
Yeah, and we're seeing quite a few like this from Holly on Facebook just now. How do we get oil and gas companies to transition or get out of the way?
Government mandates. Laws, honestly. So that's a really interesting thing about where we are, which is one of the main obstacles, I think, to a green transition is the fact that we're facing down some of the most powerful and wealthiest corporations in the history of humanity, and that have not, despite commitments that they've made now about green energy and clean energy, have not actually shifted their business models to become clean energy companies anytime in the future. And so I think we're just in a place where the honest truth is we can't expect them to wind themselves down. They haven't shown any commitment to doing that. They have participated in a disinformation campaign, all sorts of things. And so the way that you actually get them out of the way is through laws, right? Through the way that the federal government can structure markets, the ways that we do subsidies, flat out mandates, the ways that we can actually push banks to not invest in fossil fuel infrastructure, to disclose how much they have invested in fossil fuel infrastructure. We're at a point where we actually, banks, financial institutions don't have to tell us how much of their investment is funding fossil fuels or emissions. That's not law right now. And so basically the federal government, and this is my opinion, needs to take every tool in its arsenal and help to plan a wind down of fossil fuels. And if companies want to help and get on board, that's great. But we can't continue to let them set the timeline, because they aren't setting a real timeline. And a lot of the commitments that they make have no accountability measures, and no one is actually holding them to it. Anyone can put out a press statement saying they're going to be net zero. No one's watching you.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that, I mean, we're seeing sort of what I like to call capitalism on capitalism hate crimes. This industry lost about 110,000 jobs between March and August of 2020. Those jobs aren't coming back. The CEOs, escaped with their, bankruptcy bonuses. And so a lot of that is just happening on its own. Renewable energy is outpacing, renewable energy jobs, I should say, are outpacing fossil fuel energy jobs. I would also say that, sometimes we might just have to push them out of the way. That's where the direct action, comes into play. Last week, Sister Jane had our dear sister and warrior, Tara Hauska, on the show. And that's an example of how you also push fossil fuel industry out of the way. You stand up to them and say that when it comes to our ancestral land, when it comes to the public health of other young Black sisters like Rihanna all throughout the country, we're not going to let you poison our land, air, and water anymore. And we have seen, local examples of when the people united can totally take on and defeat powerful entities. In Seattle, which is my hometown when I'm not here in Nebraska, leaders like Shama Sawant on the Seattle City Council, when they were trying to buy an election, Amazon tried to buy the city council election. The people of Seattle said, "No, we're not having that," and we beat those people. In Portland, Oregon, there is a fossil fuel moratorium as well, because the people stood up and said, we're not going to have this anymore. And we're seeing this happen throughout the country. So as Rhiana said, this is a powerful industry. Around $4 trillion divested, and still, they remain. That gives you a sense of their power. But
and that's why we're trying to build numbers.
That's right.
A lot of people power to stand up to these people. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Rhiana. I'm so grateful for the robust conversation we've had. Thank you for helping us understand the Thrive Agenda better and why it's so important to get it passed. Thank you, viewers, for your great question. Now it's time for Stories from the Front Lines. This is a segment where we devote 5 minutes each Friday to hear a story, a song, or the spoken word. It's a way to get out of our heads and into our hearts. Stories from the Front Lines will be a spoken word poem today, written and performed by Gina Loring. I'm really excited because when she was a little girl, Gina attended the Laurel Springs Children's Camp that Tom Hayden and I ran. Later, I ran into her at a TEDx talk a few years ago when she performed a poem, and I was really impressed, and I invited her to perform today. Of African American, Eastern European Jewish, and Muskogee Creek Native American descent, Gina Loring weaves socio-political issues into art. As guest artist of the American Embassy under the Obama administration, she's performed her poetry and music in over 10 countries. She was featured on 2 De La Soul albums and has been commissioned to write poems honoring Quincy Jones and Prince. With a BA from Spelman College and an MFA from Antioch University, Los Angeles, she's a doctoral student in educational leadership and a professor in the Los Angeles Community College District. Additionally, she teaches poetry workshops with incarcerated teens and youth transitioning out of trafficking. Let's hear from Gina Loring.
As if her embrace does not carry us each day. Arms open, heart chakra extended, she gives and gives and gives with relentless faith in our goodness long after it is deserved, desires only for our well-being, our belonging, a song she hums low and steady. She is a sturdy wind. The ground that holds us and the stars, the moon, the Milky Way rhythm rainforest, Rocky Mountains and tundra, open air, the umbilical cord we are all connected to, fields of flowers and bloom, sandy dunes, every flowing stream, every pathway through, violets and golds and blues. Her voice is there beneath the breeze if you listen. She is speaking with each sunrise. Child, she says, do you not feel my heartbeat pulsing beneath your feet? My veins, the rivers you drink from. I am your daily bread, every medicinal root and plant, science and secrets. I am the cells in your body, water, earth, air, fire. I am the Big Bang doing big things. I am the sky your grandfather's grandfather prayed to. My oceans, my trees, my mountains. There is no life without me, yet you so carelessly swing your selfishness, wounding worlds beyond what you can see. Bees, bears, wolves, and whales, oil spills spreading like cancer. You are like a cancer, my every organ infected now, each limb gasping under the weight of your greedy grip, short-sightedness, trains, planes, and automobiles, spaceships, and skyscrapers. But there is not enough metal or cement in the world to cover all of me. I am the lifeline to all that there is. Your ancestors took rest on my shores. Your descendants know me well. They too are mine. I am one with time, does not exist beyond this, beyond this, beyond this moment, even in this moment you are taking, always taking, took my insides and spilled them out. Even my fingers are heavy now from the gravity of your ungratefulness. Cut me open, bled every vessel dry. I would cry, but the storms and hurricanes of my weeping do not alarm you enough. My volcanoes and forest fires, tornadoes and monsoons do not move you enough. I am shaking from the core, breaking, cracking open, pulling up at the roots. These days, you are lucky I still open my eyes at all. You have no idea the damage you have caused, the troubled waters you have conjured. Oh, children. Oh, children. enough.
Okay.
What a moving way to end today's show. Thank you, Gina, for your powerful reading. And
Incredible.
thanks again to Rhiana and Anthony for helping us to understand the Thrive agenda. You know, I know there's a lot going on right now and a lot to keep track of, but don't get overwhelmed. We're in this together. We've got each other's backs. Fire Drill Friday is totally committed to increasing our collective knowledge about these issues and taking the necessary action to do something about the just transition that we know is possible. As we're seeing right now in Texas and across the central US, the human impacts of climate-fueled extreme weather disasters are staggering. This is why we fight to avoid a worsening climate crisis. We owe it to everyone to do everything we can to fight for a more resilient energy system. You know, climate denial is not a victimless crime, and lives are already being lost to climate-intensified extreme weather disasters. These events are tragic reminders that the fossil fuel industry must be held accountable for its role in the climate crisis, not subsidized at taxpayers' expense. Over the last week, the countless people and the many organizations that make up the Green New Deal network have sent nearly 25,000 messages to President Biden, letting him know that we expect his economic recovery plan to be in line with the Thrive agenda. And we're going to keep sending thousands more to keep the pressure on him until he announces his plan next month. So send your message now by going to firedrillfridays.com/take action. I want to end with something really important. We talked a bit about New Mexican Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who President Biden has nominated to be the Secretary of the Interior. Haaland's nomination as the first Indigenous cabinet secretary and second highest ranking enrolled Native American to ever serve in the federal government is enormously consequential. As the first Indigenous cabinet secretary, Representative Haaland will play a pivotal role in healing the wounds the federal government has inflicted on tribal communities, upholding their trust and ensuring their voices are heard after being shut out for so long. As we mentioned earlier, she is also a supporter of the Green New Deal and a co-sponsor of the Thrive agenda. It's imperative that the Senate act quickly to approve Congresswoman Haaland's historic nomination to ensure the department has a permanent leader to fulfill its mission, implement the widely supported Biden-Harris plan and protect our public lands. As you can imagine, the oil and gas industry does not want to see Haaland confirmed, and they are fighting this nomination with all they've got, as are moderate Democrats. They think she's too radical because she has stood next to Indigenous leaders opposing the Keystone XL pipeline, and, for example, and the DAPL pipeline in Standing Rock. Let's make sure the Fire Drill Friday community shows up strong for her. I know I've already asked you to write a letter to Biden in support of Thrive, but if you can, write or call your senator, ask them to support Haaland's confirmation. Okay, next week, we have Congresswoman Omar to take a deeper look into what's been happening in Congress, what we can expect, and how we can keep the pressure on. Please stay safe and warm during these turbulent times. To all those facing the dire situation in Texas, our hearts are with you. Stay safe. See you next time.